had a case where, and this wouldn't fall under this because it was a board BCC meeting, but the neighborhood got a notice. They thought it was a good thing, not a bad thing, because they thought it meant that this junkyard was going to go away because of that action that they, that was going to come before the board. Well, then the action was made, but it wasn't to get rid of the junkyard, it was to expand their business. So when they found out later after the decision was made, because they didn't come because they thought it was a good thing, but then they found out, no, it was a bad thing, it was too late for them to do anything. So, situation like that, if they think that, they misunderstand what the case is going to be, then they find out afterwards it's too late because they didn't come because they thought a good thing was going to happen. Or in a lot of cases I get, people are like, well, we elected you to be our representative, so I don't need to go. Because they expect us and the people in the BZA and PZC to represent them so that they don't have to come to these meetings. I always have to, of course, tell them, like, you still have to come. But, people, though, they elected us as their representatives, so they trust that we're going to make the right decisions. Sometimes, though, we may not know because they didn't write to us, they didn't show up or whatever. And now they're in a position where they can't do anything about it if this goes through. So, I just don't feel that the opportunity should be taken away from them, because either they may not have understood the notice, they thought it was a good thing when it was a bad thing. They thought we'd make the right decision, and we didn't for whatever reason. And then conditions. Sometimes, huh? I'm sure I don't make the perfect decision all the time. Like we're human, we make mistakes, especially if we don't get the information that we need. Another one is that sometimes at these, sometimes conditions are added on too, which isn't really noticed in advance. So what if it's one of those conditions that were added on that they had a problem with, which no one saw coming? So, there could be a lot of different situations. Oh, not to mention vacation. Well, if someone had a vacation already, planned, if another county did this and they were coming to Disney and they had to cancel their trip to Disney, because of something, then we're going to lose money here. So, people make plans. Maybe they end up in the hospital. It happened to me, emergency, appendix, things happen. So sometimes, we need to be able to have that ability for people to still be able to save their neighborhood or whatever it is that they're not happy with.
F11. I'll open the public hearing on this item, and Ms. Brandy Driggers, Assistant Manager from the Zoning Division, is excited to be here and to help close us out this afternoon. You're recognized.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I will be presenting the Chapter 38 zoning and the Chapter 30 Planning and Development Code updates. This is the first of two public hearings that are required for this item because it does affect the allowable uses on land. With me in the audience are Jennifer Moreau, the zoning manager, and Taylor Jones, the chief planner of our commercial team. So first we're going to go through a background of the proposed amendments. I'll go through the significant changes in the proposed ordinance. There are a lot of different changes, but they're mainly non-substantive, so we won't be going through those. I'll provide a summary of what the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended. The proposed amendments that staff is recommending after we had our briefings with the commissioners, and then the next steps. So this item went through several work sessions as well as several public hearings. We did go before the Development Advisory Board back in June with this item. We also took it to the Greater Orlando Builders Association, and then we sent them the updated drafts. It went to the Planning and Zoning Commission for adoption on November 16th, and we're here before you today. At this hearing, we will not have a requested action. However, at the second public hearing on December 12th is when we'll be asking for recommendation of adoption. And if everything goes well, the effective date we're hoping to be January 1st of 2024. So Chapter 38 of the zoning code establishes the development guidelines for all of the zoning districts as it relates to permitted uses, conditions for permitted uses, and the site development standards. It's what our team uses to review permits, what the development community, architects, engineers use to design their projects. It's what our code enforcement division uses to enforce the code and make sure that people are doing what they're supposed to on their property. And so it's a document that was written in 1957, so it's a quite large document. It's a quite old document. So from time to time, it needs to be updated. Some of the changes that we're going to be proposing today relate to new definitions for uses and performance standards for those uses. A lot of the times the state will make changes, and therefore we have to update our code to be consistent with the changes that have been made by the state. Also, throughout time, processes change, so we have to update our processes in order to be consistent with what we do today in practice. And then as time changes, things change, so we have to clean up the language for consistency. So the first change that we're going to be making is to the mechanical equipment section of the code. This is a new section that we're introducing. Currently, we have a section for generators and for pool equipment, but we don't really have any standards for air conditioning equipment or other types of equipment that are related to the use of the property. So what we're trying to do is just put them all together under one grouping, so you don't have to go throughout the code searching in different places for the standards, and then make it consistent across the board. So with this update, we're requiring that your mechanical equipment be screened from the right-of-way by an opaque buffer. It can be a fence or it can be shrubbery. That's for the ground-mounted equipment. It prohibits it in the front yard, side street yard, or between the principal structure and right-of-way. It will require that it not be located in the front unless it's for the rear alley-loaded townhomes. And then it establishes residential setbacks for the side yard, front yard, rear yard, and normal high water elevation. Commissioner, did you have a question?
Okay, that's it.
Okay. No, I thought the commissioner had a question.
No.
Sorry about that.
They're going to wait till you finish.
Okay. The next section of the code that we're amending is our special events section of the code. So today we have a process by which we process special event applications. Those are submitted to the fire marshal's office, and then they're routed to the zoning division for review. And so basically we're just taking and codifying that process in our code. We're establishing timeframes and hours of operation based on the zoning districts. So if it's in residential versus if it's in commercial, there's different hours of operations, there's different uses that you can have. We're setting parking ratios. So this is at the Planning and Zoning Commission. There was a lot of discussion on what we were proposing to prohibit the use of amplified sound for the residential, professional office, agricultural districts. The Planning and Zoning Commission felt like that wasn't necessary. So at the time, instead of completely removing that prohibition from the code, we suggested that we amend the language to make it consistent with the noise ordinance. Later, we found that the noise ordinance exempts special event permits from their section of the code. So in the draft that you have before us, you won't see that because we took it out as they had requested at that public hearing. The next section of code that we're adding is for utility trailers. Today the code has regulations for boats and RVs, which are similar in nature, and where those can be stored on the property, how many you can have. So we didn't really have anything for utility trailers in the code, and sometimes these can become a nuisance if they're stored in the right-of-way or in the street, or they're blocking a neighbor's view from them exiting their driveway into the right-of-way. So this is really something that is going to enable our code enforcement division to go out and regulate these, because right now there's no code where they can enforce any kind of regulations on them. So the current standards that we're putting in place is that the utility trailers, similar to RVs and boats, must be screened from the right-of-way. It cannot be stored in the front yard. It has to be located in a rear or side yard. It must be, can't be seen from the right-of-way. And then it establishes setbacks from the side, rear, side street, and normal high water elevation. This also establishes the number of utility trailers you're allowed to have per parcel. So if you have a parcel that's an acre or less, you're allowed to have 1 utility trailer. If your parcel is between 1 and 5 acres, you could have up to 5 utility trailers. And if it's greater than 5 acres, you could have up to 10. The next section of code that we're amending is the residential freestanding or ground-mounted solar systems. So currently, our code requires that these be screened by a 8-foot, 6-foot, or 8-foot fence. And it can be reduced if the height of the solar panels are less. So we're adding code language that allows them to be screened by vegetation or landscaping, a hedge, something other than just a fence, because that's really restrictive. We're also reducing the screening requirements if the solar panels are located 30 feet from the right-of-way. So if you have a large lot and the solar panels are 30 feet into the lot, then you wouldn't be able to see them from the right-of-way. So there might not be a necessary requirement to screen them. So we're allowing that they don't have to be screened if they're located 30 feet from the right-of-way. There's another amendment that we're also proposing, which I'll show you later in the presentation. We were changing the amount of the size of the solar panel system that you're allowed to have on site. We're now going to just defer that to the National Electrical Code, and you'll see that later on in the presentation. As for biosolids, septic treatment, and storage facilities, this is a section of code that the Environmental Protection Division has asked us to add for them. This establishes performance standards for where the type of materials that these types of facilities produce can be stored, their location, the height that they can be stored at. And it also establishes compliance standards where they have to collect the runoff, they have to provide an odor control study, and then this is mainly for the health, safety, and welfare of the neighbors and the neighboring properties so that there's not any impacts to them from the result of these uses. In our code, we are also changing several of the definitions for our lots. We have a lot of different types of lots in the county, and so describing them in text is good, but it's sometimes easier if you can visually see them on a graphic. As you can see, there are a lot of different types of lots in the county, and establishing what the front yard on these lots is important because it tells you where your structures can be located, where your setbacks are, and what can go in those areas. One type of unique lot that we have is called a reverse corner lot. So the code establishes a lot as the narrowest width of the lot as the frontage. So the driveway, the orientation of the house, it doesn't establish where your lot frontage is. This is a reverse corner lot because the frontage is on the left-hand side of the screen, and the rear of this lot actually abuts the front of another adjacent lot that has frontage on the property, the right-of-way to the north. So therefore, their setbacks may be different. Another type of unique lot we have is a double frontage lot. This means that you would have frontage on 2 ends of the lot because this lot fronts on 2 different separate streets. In the county, we also have a lot of subdivisions that have cul-de-sacs. Cul-de-sacs create unique lots. They are typically a pie-shaped lot. And so the lot frontage is determined not at the street, but where the lot actually meets the width, the required width per the code. So on this lot, you can see the minimum lot width is not met until further back on the site, almost 50 feet into the lot. where that blue line is shown. For fences and walls, we're clarifying that fences and walls within clear view triangles must not exceed 4 feet in height or 50% opacity. So you can see there's several yellow triangles on this graphic. These are all areas where you would be required to have a clear view triangle. The current code does not allow you to have a fence in this area at all. So with this change, we're proposing that there be a fence allowed in this area. However, the fence can only be 4 feet in height, and it has to be 50% transparent. That's for visibility and so that you don't have any potential pedestrian vehicular collisions. So as you can see, we just talked about a reverse corner lot. The lot highlighted is a reverse corner lot. So the rear of that lot backs up to the frontage of the lot to the right of it. And they have a driveway right there at the corner. If you were to put a 6-foot fence on that lot corner, then someone pulling out of the driveway could potentially hit a pedestrian, and the pedestrian might not see the car coming out. So we're clarifying that in the code. We're also clarifying that the max height for a fence in the side street yard setback is 6 feet, except for on a reverse corner lot like we're discussing here. Some additional changes that we're making to the fences and walls. We're just adding aluminum picket as a proposed allowable use, similar to chain link fences. We're clarifying that within commercial or industrial districts, the fence height is allowed to be a maximum of 8 feet. We're clarifying the setback for the normal high water elevations. And then we're clarifying that the height of the fence or wall, how it's measured from the grade to the top of the fence. So this was another point of discussion at the Planning and Zoning Commission. Staff was proposing to measure the height of the fence from the finished grade, which would be where the building pad is, or the parking lot, to the highest point of the fence. The Planning and Zoning Commission felt like that it needed to be measured from the existing grade to the highest point of the fence in case the property slopes and you wouldn't have a taller wall in one area than the other. So staff made that change in the ordinance that you received, and we're just noting it here for you. Another point that we're making in this section of the code is we're adding language that prohibits a property owner from installing a fence or a wall that would create a situation where another property owner cannot access their property. We run into this where we have an access easement over one property to an adjacent property. So maybe your neighbor doesn't have frontage on the right-of-way, so there's an access easement that's recorded in official records that allows them to access their property through that easement. If someone were to put up a fence or a wall, then they would not have access to their property any longer. So this is just allowing us the ability to look at that and revoke a fence permit if we are notified that is the situation. As for parking, we were before you a few months ago with the update to the tree preservation and removal ordinance. At that time, we were suggesting language where if an individual was trying to save a heritage or a specimen tree on their site, that we allow them to reduce their parking spaces in order to preserve that tree. Specimen and heritage trees are the longest living trees. They're the highest quality trees that we have in the county, and they're hard to replace. So in response to that, we've updated this section of the code, which allows an individual to reduce their parking spaces, the minimum number of parking spaces, up to 10%, or a maximum number of spaces, whichever is less, based on the size of their building and the use. So depending on what use they have, the parking demand is greater or less. So that's why you see the different size requirements for the buildings, and then also the number of parking spaces, maximum number of parking spaces that they can reduce. We did work very closely with our Transportation Planning Division on this so that we could ensure that there still was enough parking for the use on the site, but that we were also accommodating the opportunity to save those high-value trees. As for off-street parking requirements, currently our code requires that all of our parking spaces be 9 by 20 or 180 square feet. We've looked at what other jurisdictions have done, and then what development committee has told us is the standards. So we're reducing those parking space requirements to a minimum of 9 by 18 feet. It's a reduction of 2 feet. This will allow the developer to have greater flexibility in the design of their project. And then we're also allowing for the vehicle overhang up to 2 feet past the curb or wheel stop to be counted towards the minimum parking space depth, and it can also be unpaved or sodded. So this will reduce the impervious surface area in these parking lots, and then also, again, this was something that the development community brought to our attention and requested. In our code, we have a reference to a graphic, and it tells you how to design your parking. However, that graphic lives at Public Works, which is located at John Young Parkway. So not only do we have a hunt and search in our code, we send you somewhere else to look for something. So we decided that we would take that graphic and update it and put it in our code. So we're adding this graphic into the code, which gives you how to design a parking lot, the parking angle, the width of the stalls, the stall depths, and it also provides a graphic. And then it also allows for the dimensions for 1 or 2 way drive aisles. And this is for on-site parking. Our section of the code, or Chapter 38, has 2 major sections in it. One is our site and building requirements table. The other is our use table. So the basic site and principal building requirements table tells you what you can do, where you can do it. It tells you what your setbacks are. It tells you your minimum lot width. It tells you all of your minimum lot area. It tells you what all of your setbacks are. So we found that this information was scattered throughout the code. So you'd have to go and hunt for one thing in one section and then come back here and look at this section for the additional requirements. So what we tried to do here is take out all of those requirements that are applicable to this table and put them in here and strike them through the other sections of the code. One thing that was in one section of the code is the side street yard setback. Obviously, if it's not in this table, you don't know it's there, so you might miss it. So we're adding that into this table. We're also adding the normal high water elevation setback on lakes. This was a footnote previously, so it could have easily been missed when you were trying to develop your site, and then you would get a deficiency comment for it from us. So we're trying to make it more clear and concise for the reader. And then also, there's no reference in the code to what your maximum density or your floor area ratio is, so it doesn't tell you how do you know how many units you can build based on your size of your property or what your square footage can be. So we're adding a reference to the comprehensive plan in here that gives you those density and floor area ratio requirements. And then anything that we really couldn't include in this table, but that might be applicable to the development of a site, we've added this additional standards column, and at the bottom right there you'll see a reference to a different section of the code where you can find those additional standards for this use. The other thing that we found is that although all of the zoning districts are in this table, the industrial zoning districts were not. So we're adding the industrial zoning districts into this table so that you have all of those basic site and building requirements in one location. We have another section of the code that has additional site and building requirements or setbacks. This is our major street section of the code. This is problematic because it establishes additional requirements and setbacks if you're located on certain functionally classified roadways. So we're actually eliminating this section completely. And then we're moving the definitions from this section into the definitions section of Chapter 38 because there are other locations in the code that reference a collector road or an arterial. So as an example of how this section could be overly restricted, and then we feel like the setbacks addressed in the previous table, the site and building requirement setbacks sufficiently cover any setbacks needed on the property. And we did work with the development engineering team on this to get their blessing as well. This lot in the corner is on 2 roadways, and both of those roadways are classified as rural collectors. So in order to establish the setbacks on this lot, you would have to go from the center line of each street and draw a line 100 feet into the property. So if you look at where the 100 feet lands, it almost cuts this property in half, whereas now your developable area is substantially reduced. And I didn't even add the rear or side yard setbacks on this property, because then that would further reduce your building area. So we feel like the setbacks can be addressed through the site and building setback table, because this property would have between a 20 to 35-foot setback from the front, from the roadways on either side. So it wouldn't be overly prohibitive for them building on this site. As I mentioned, the other section of code that we use quite often is our use table. So this establishes what you can do and where you can do it. It has all of the different use categories that are listed in the standard industrial classification group, and then it has all of our zoning districts at the top. So if you look at the table, if there's a P in the little box, it's a permitted use. If there's an S in the box, it means that that use requires a special exception. And if there's a number, it means you have to go back to our conditions for approved uses section of the code and look up what the conditions are associated with to have that use on that property. And those are found in section 38-79. So you'll see a lot of changes to this table, which are just reflective of what we're doing in the other sections of the ordinance. With relation to section 30, or chapter 30 of the code, we're proposing that we're adding language so that if someone appeals a decision for the Planning and Zoning Commission or the Board of Zoning Adjustment, they will have had to attend the hearing or submit objections prior to appealing a determination by those boards. That's just new language that we're adding in. And so here, I kind of touched on it in the presentation, but I just wanted to outline the major changes that the Planning and Zoning Commission made during their hearing. As I mentioned, the special events section of the code, they wanted to remove the prohibition on amplified sound in the residential, agricultural, professional office, and neighborhood residential districts. That has been removed from the draft ordinance that you have in front of you. They also changed how the height of a fence or wall is measured from the finished grade to existing grade to the highest point of the wall, and that is also reflected in the ordinance that you have. The one thing that we haven't talked about yet is the accessory structure section of the code. At the hearing, they requested that we change the rear yard setback for structures that are 15 feet or less in height from 5 feet to 2 feet. So that was reflected in the ordinance based on their recommendations. After we had the ordinance drafted, we were doing our briefings with the commissioners, and there were some topics that were brought up that we thought needed to be included in the update. So I'm just referencing those here so that we can make these changes to the ordinance before we bring it back to you for final adoption. When we were looking at the special events code, we found that we had in the commercial and industrial section an allowance for the zoning managers to grant an extension on the duration of the special event for good cause shown. That, however, was not included in the residential, agricultural, professional office, or neighborhood residential section. So we're looking to add that language in yellow to that section. Additionally, we were proposing to allow truck terminals and truck stops within the C3 zoning district, as long as they were not located within 1,000 feet or of any residentially zoned property. Otherwise, they would require a special exception. Well, 500 feet of any residentially zoned property, otherwise it would trigger a special exception. After conversations with the commissioners, we felt like the need to increase that to 1,000 feet was necessary. So that has been noted, so we can change it in the ordinance before it comes back to you for adoption. The other change that we'll be making, which I touched on during the solar panel systems, is that we were putting, the current code has a restriction on the size of the ground-mounted solar system that you can have, and it's limited to 25% of living area of the principal structure, which is the home. We were proposing to increase that to 120% of the electrical or thermal energy needed to power the home. After speaking with our building division and our electrical team, they explained that the National Building Code or the National Electrical Code actually dictates how big your system can be. And so we're removing all the language that you see in white, and then the new language will be the square footage of any ground-mounted solar system shall not count towards the allowable square footage for other accessory structures. And what that means is that it doesn't, you're only allowed to have a certain amount of square footage on your property for accessory structures. You can't have 20 sheds that are like larger than your house. They're capped at certain square footages, but solar panel systems will not count towards that square footage at all. So today we're not requesting any action, but we'd like to hear your feedback so that we can include anything that you have concerns on or that you would like to see changed in the ordinance before we bring it back to you for the adoption public hearing on December 12th. And with that, staff is available for questions.
All right. I'm going to open it up for any public comment. Do we have any members of the public present who wish to be heard on this item?
We have no speaker cards for this item, Mayor.
I guess we wore them down today, huh? All right, we'll close the public hearing, and we do have questions or comments by members of the board. So we're going to start with Commissioner Wilson.
Thank you so much. I know this has been a heavy lift, a lot of work. Just a quick, I did not go back and look at what the Planning and Zoning Commission said. So if I could get clarification on the update to the 3043 requires that to qualify to file a notice of appeal, the appellant must have submitted objections to the item during the hearing. What does that mean exactly?
So basically, if you don't file an objection, if you don't send us a letter saying that you're against this proposed change, if you don't show up at the hearing, if you don't note that you have an objection to this change, so that the Planning and Zoning Commission or the Board of Zoning Adjustment can take that into consideration when they're making their determinations, then you don't have the ability to file an appeal after the fact.
And right now, you have up until?
The time frame would not change. So they have 15 days after the hearing to file an appeal. This just is that if you never came to the hearing, if you never told us that you had an objection, if you never sent an email to the commission stating that you were opposed to this and they took action on it, then they wouldn't have had that knowledge before they were able to take action on that item, to take that into consideration.
So Joel, this sounds like a due process issue to me, and I'm a little concerned about.
Well, actually, this is a standard rule of procedure, if you will, that if someone intends to consider perhaps a challenge to a decision.
Can't really hear Joel, by the way. Joel,
I'm sorry.
either pull the mic forward or your mic isn't totally on. To the technical people in the back. Miles, try it now.
Can you hear me now? Okay, I'm sorry. Actually, this is a standard rule of procedure where if someone wishes to challenge a decision made at a judicial or quasi-judicial hearing, they need to appear at that hearing and then basically voice their opinion if they have objections, comments, what have you, as opposed to just sitting back and then later on, just out of nowhere, filing an appeal and saying, oh, I have these objections to what you did. And of course, it's actually unfair to the county and the Planning and Zoning Commission and the BZA for someone to do that, because they might have maybe
I think-
had a different opinion if they'd heard that person's comments.
Maybe I didn't articulate my concern. So when you see the submitted objections to the item during the hearing,
Yes,
so during the hearing indicates to me that if they don't do it before there's an outcome, right? I may not have an objection because what is an obvious denial to me didn't go that way. So after the denial, now I have an objection. Is that too late?
it is too late, because they have to do that contemporaneous with when the hearing is taking place. Because again, that way, the board that's looking at the issue can take into account their comments or objections, and maybe,
But isn't that the purpose of an appeal?
well, the purpose of an appeal is to allow someone who is, who's actually shown up at the hearing and been rejected in terms of what their comments were, to then take it to a different level. I mean, we actually had a court case quite some time ago where someone who was in these chambers, where someone who was a quasi-judicial hearing, they sat back or they didn't show up, and then the board made a decision, and then they challenged the board's decision. So in the brief we filed with the Fifth District Court of Appeal, we pointed out that they weren't even there. They didn't make any, if they were, they didn't make any comments. And the Fifth District Court of Appeal basically said that the county had been quote-unquote sandbagged, and because the circuit court, had overturned the board's decision, and we went to the Fifth District Court of Appeal. So this is actually a very standard rule where people need to show up at the public hearings and voice their comments or objections if they want to consider taking it up on appeal.
Okay. I mean, I kind of fundamentally believe a lot of times that those things happen not because they were just sitting back and eating bonbons, but that because they believed a particular outcome was going to be something that it didn't end up happening. So I guess my concern about this is there a need to change? This is going to change the way that the process goes. Do we see a discernible need to do that?
Well, wasn't there, I think there was a case that recently happened, Jennifer, where you said somebody filed an appeal. And again, remember, Commissioner, that notice is provided. And so people that, whose interest may be impacted by a particular request for a land development permit are supposed to be receiving notice. And if they do, then they have to decide, is this important enough for me to show up at the board
Listen,
meeting?
I have more notice conversations than you would ever like to have about people saying, it makes no sense where your little yellow circle comes, and my neighbor got it and I didn't, and he doesn't care, no one's lived there for 20 years, but I care, and I've always cared, and why'd you leave me out? That is a whole different ball of wax, but I understand what you're saying, that satisfies the legal requirement. I'm wondering is there something broken that needs to be fixed here?
So I recall that Joel and I had a very specific conversation, and I think it was related to a case. I cannot recall the specific instance at this time, but as a part of that conversation, we both said, maybe this is something that we should take the time to go ahead and update now. The other thing I would note, though, is that the actual language, if you go to page 178, that we're proposing to add, says such person shall have submitted oral or written comments or objections. So it's not that you have to object or say I'm opposed before you can appeal. It's just that you have to show up and provide some level of interest or comments at the hearing, or even not even show up to the hearing, just provide some comments that say you've got issues, you've got questions, whatever it is, and then you might be considered an appellant, if
So
you will.
and this is, and I apologize, but we have so many of the cases that come through our District 1 cases. So let's say it's somebody who opposes and has come to a community meeting, but doesn't come to the zoning meeting. Does that still count as an objection if they've gone on the record? Or let's say they've emailed their commissioner, and I have a stack of emails, but I'm like, well, I don't know, we'll see what the zoning committee does.
The way it's written, I would say no, and Joel, I could defer to you on that, and what I am seeing
Yes.
here now, it says shall have submitted oral or written comments or objections during the Board of Zoning Adjustment hearing, so, I mean, we could look at
Yeah.
changing that to say prior to or during, for
Right,
one.
and
I mean, I want to weigh in on this.
And one other comment I just wanted to make is that this doesn't prohibit any commissioner if a constituent reaches out to you and says, I'm aggrieved because, in this particular situation, this is what happened and this is why I have a reason to have another public hearing or whatever it is, it doesn't stop any commissioner from pulling an item for a separate public hearing either.
Right. If that's the desire of the commissioner, I think what I was more concerned about was the ability for the concerned citizen to be able to have remedies available, especially if they think they've done whatever would satisfy something like that, right? If they feel like I have reached out, I did go to the community meeting, how is that not sufficient? Just a, concern. That's it for me. Sorry.
I don't know. I understand what Commissioner Wilson is saying. I'm just wondering if there was a way in terms of the rules of procedure as the hearing is going forward, if there was some kind of notice that could be given to those who may be present that if you have some objection to anything that occurs today, you have the opportunity to voice your objection during the meeting. If we were able to clarify that somewhere where the person is essentially put on notice that if there's an action taken that day, they will have the opportunity to at least voice their, because what I'm hearing the commissioner say is that if the decision is made in the meeting and they have sat silently up until that point and they did not know that they were going to be adversely impacted and then an action occurred, is that what you're saying? Okay, and so I'm just saying if there was a way in the rules of procedure to, as the meeting is opened up where that is explained to the person, if we're saying that this person had to make it known during the meeting that they had an objection, just trying to see if we could resolve that somehow in the meeting. Where they at least don't have the argument that I didn't know the outcome until it actually happened.
And part of it, I think, starts with the notice that's sent to the citizen, basically letting them know about the time and date of the hearing, and maybe that should be beefed up a bit in terms of if you have any comments or objections, you need to show up at that hearing, and then also, at the actual public hearing at the outset, perhaps the chairman of or the chair of the board could remind citizens that if they have concerns or comments, that they need to let the board know what those comments are.
If there's a way to codify that in the procedures.
Okay, we'll look at that.
Okay, we can talk about this later. I have a couple thoughts I would like to share.
Okay, we can try to work through that before the second hearing, Mayor.
Okay. Commissioner, Commissioner Bonilla, you had said that I have you down to speak, but I don't know if you wanted to speak about this particular issue. Okay, go ahead.
That, yeah. So, I had a case where, and this wouldn't fall under this because it was a board BCC meeting, but the neighborhood got a notice. They thought it was a good thing, not a bad thing, because they thought it meant that this junkyard was going to go away because of that action that that was going to come before the board. Well, then the action was made, but it wasn't to get rid of the junkyard, it was to expand their business. So when they found out later after the decision was made, because they didn't come because they thought it was a good thing, but then they found out, no, it was a bad thing, it was too late for them to do anything. So, situation like that, if they think that, they misunderstand what the case is going to be, then they find out afterwards it's too late because they didn't come because they thought a good thing was going to happen. Or in a lot of cases I get, people are like, well, we elected you to be our representative, so I don't need to go. Because they expect us and the people in the BZA and PZC to represent them so that they don't have to come to these meetings. I always have to, of course, tell them, like, you still have to come. But, people, though, they elected us as their representatives, so they trust that we're going to make the right decisions. Sometimes, though, we may not know because they didn't write to us, they didn't show up, or whatever. And now they're in a position where they can't do anything about it if this goes through. So, I just don't feel that the opportunity should be taken away from them, because either they may not have understood the notice, they thought it was a good thing when it was a bad thing. They thought we'd make the right decision, and we didn't for whatever reason. And then conditions. Sometimes, huh? I'm sure I don't make the perfect decision all the time. Like we're human, we make mistakes, especially if we don't get the information that we need. Another one is that sometimes at these, sometimes conditions are added on too, which isn't really noticed in advance. So what if it's one of those conditions that were added on that they had a problem with, which no one saw coming? So, there could be a lot of different situations. Oh, not to mention vacation. Well, if someone had a vacation already, planned, if another county did this and they were coming to Disney and they had to cancel their trip to Disney, because of something, then we're going to lose money here. So, people make plans. Maybe they had end up in the hospital. It happened to me. Emergency, appendix, things happen. So sometimes, we need to be able to have that ability for people to still be able to save their neighborhood or whatever it is that they're not happy with.
Yeah, I get that, but we do have to have some finality to the process.
We do after 15
because-
days.
And so you all hear the feedback, hopefully, and I don't know how to get there. Okay, but I don't want us to go backwards, so to speak, because we got a whole host of people that want to speak. Commissioner Wilson, are you really?
I'm going to let this go right after this, but I just want to also follow up that part of the issue, and this has been pretty consistent, but it's something that I think if we're looking at this is important, is that the planning and zone, P&Z and the BZA typically do not have information about what happened in a community meeting. And so people who have come to those and expressed themselves think somebody in the county has logged something. And then they get here and they're like, I've already said my piece. And that BZA, PZ, I may have gotten it by then. And I understand what you're saying, but that's a lot of reliance on the final backstop, right? So I just want to plant that, and then I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah, there's that too.
Okay.
I did some other things. Is it someone else's turn, though, before coming back to me? I don't know where I am in line.
Yeah, Commissioner Uribe is up, then
Okay.
Commissioner Moore, then Commissioner Bonilla,
Okay.
then, okay. All right,
No, it's your turn.
all right. Commissioner Uribe.
Okay. I appreciate you guys have spent a lot of time with me. By the way, I found all my notes from the previous time, so I'm going to ask for an extra meeting because there are a couple things, because I have also heard, I'm going to go through the presentation and a couple of things that I wanted to bring up. One is the temporary, this is on special events, right? Temporary event held on private property, primarily outdoors, attended by 100 or more people, that is unlike, I got to tell you, if it's a commercial, a business, I get it, but now we're saying if you have a birthday party and I have 100 kids, which I've had about 70, I'm going to have to get a permit to have my first graders come over, have the fire marshal come to my house, make sure they can be in the backyard. I think we're getting into a slippery slope, and we're getting into private people's homes, because it just says private property, so my house is private property. And when I add the 70 kids plus their parents, I'm in violation of having a pool slide thing at my house. I mean, I'm very concerned. I get it when we're talking about commercial private property, but when we started, Super Bowl parties, everything, we're basically are we gonna say somebody can go out and say there's 102 people here, where's the fire marshal has gone, and it says outdoor too, which I think we're pushing it. I've never realized that we would get into people's personal lives to that level, and I have an issue on it. I would encourage you guys to look at it. No, they're kids. They're 6 years old. They come with their parents.
So typically, that has been where you can have an outdoor public assembly event on private property, but when it impacts public right-of-way.
But it doesn't say that here.
Well, I realize, but that's what I'm saying to staff. That typically is what triggers the requirement to obtain some type of permit.
I would say that, but I've gone to plenty of events, I don't know about people here, where we're shuttled into someone's home, and then we go. We're not parking at that person's home for a function.
So again,
Like weddings, yeah, exactly.
there's in terms of our outdoor public assembly ordinance, that is all of the circumstances are articulated, and that may be different from here, right?
Yeah, we have a public assembly ordinance that applies to public right-of-way, sidewalks, parks, and that sort of thing. So that's an ordinance that applies to public property, Mayor.
Right, and if the event is on private property but impacts public right-of-way, there's a distinction. So I just want to make sure that what we're talking about here, we're not necessarily replicating a process that exists for obtaining that, a public assembly type of event.
Mayor, I can
So-
provide some clarification.
Yeah, if you could, because,
Let's try to clarify that, because we're not talking about merging that, as I understand it, under this ordinance.
Right. Jennifer might be able to expand on it.
Yes, so there's several permits that you get through the fire marshal's office. They're sort of the intake version of and then they distribute it to multiple people for review. Zoning is one of those reviewing bodies. So we already review against outdoor special event permits. So anything that that requires an outdoor special event permit, which is essentially 100 people or more, this isn't a requirement that we're creating. This is just anything that requires 100, or an outdoor special events, 100 people or more, technically is required to get an outdoor special event permit through the fire marshal's office. That is on private property. There's a public assembly permit that is on public property, I believe, which is a separate permit process that we're not necessarily a part of the review of. But so right now, when we get a special event permit that we're reviewing, we don't actually have any zoning code to review it against. So right now, we're just applying policy. We're saying, okay, they want to do Halloween horror nights on this hotel property, for 30 nights. Okay, where are they parking? How are the people getting there? And we're just trying to, so we have some general standards that we use, but it's not codified. So the intent of this is to codify the standards that we're basically already applying to the special event permits that someone is already applying for. So we're not creating a new process, we're not adding additional things, we're just trying to make it clear and concise and codify it so that we're not just applying, standards that aren't codified, essentially.
yeah, and I get that, like when we just had our beers and barbecue, okay? We went through the permitting process, we didn't even have 100 people, but we had to. But the word private property here is the one thing doesn't say commercial private property, doesn't say a public private property, like in the sense of running a gazebo at a park or whatever, like we do with Pioneer Days. It just says private property. And that's something that we're now overstepping on what people do on their own, at their own home, at their own property. And I've gone to plenty of weddings where we don't park in there. I just went to a function in Altamont where we were brought in, like they had valet, and valet parked somewhere else and came back. I mean, this is where I'm getting concerned, and I'll be happy to discuss it further with you.
And it may need to have some kind of cross-reference, but I can tell you that law enforcement often responds into neighborhoods and residential communities where someone is having a big party that is impacting the entire neighborhood, where it's spilling over into the roadway, they blocked off a road, fire or other first response vehicles can't get by. And so those things do require some kind of review in order to keep the public safe. So just because the trigger is private property, there should be maybe some cross-reference between the different processes to make certain that nothing falls through the gap.
Same could be said with all these parking reductions we're doing. Anybody has a party in their apartment with 10 people and you're reducing parking, we're going to have the same thing.
Well, there's nothing in here that is reducing parking unless you're trying to
Well, I
preserve a
mean,
heritage
we are
tree.
reducing property on commercial, I am, because Cerveza House would be a perfect example.
No, what I'm saying is in our current code provisions, we're not actually proposing any parking
No,
reductions.
what I'm talking about is what the mayor's saying, where you got blockage of things. So we're talking about one thing about public safety when he's saying fire, police, but then on another page, we're going to talk about how we're reducing parking for commercial lots. We're saying 10,000, so it'd be 10, I'll get to
No,
that, I'll get to that
okay,
slide.
yeah.
Okay, on the utility trailer thing, I am a little, so I want some clarification. So we said, cannot be stored right-of-way, driveway, front yard, or side street yard, must be kept in the side or rear yard. Can you please define side street yard?
So a side street yard would only apply on a corner lot where you've got two streets for your property. And so the narrowest, on residential property, the narrowest portion facing the public street is the front. So the other longer portion is going to be the side street. And so the side street is essentially anything between the house and the street.
Okay, so this one, I see that if you've got less than an acre, you've got one. So I have a particular situation, I have a lot of lakes in my district, Lake Conway, Lake Jessamine, Lake Holden, where you've got people who have a boat and who have a business where they need a trailer. So they would be in violation of having their business, their trailer that they take to work that's unmarked, and they have a boat. And I'm a little concerned about that. I've been sending this stuff over to the mayor of Belle Isle, because we're gonna have a lot of violations right off the bat when a big chunk of those residents live on a lake across the street from a lake, so they may have a boat, but also may have an enclosed trailer.
So we have separate code that allows for boats. We
But I
also
mean, but
have-
you're saying, but I'm,
This is solely for utility trailers. We already have a completely
so we're
separate
saying,
code.
so the boat will be separate, it would not be counted as both, so you can have a
Now,
boat
if it's a
and
boat on a
trailer.
utility trailer, then we would count it as a boat and a utility trailer, right? You have both, but if
What I
it's-
mean, boats can't fit in a utility trailer, boats fit on a boat trailer. You know,
Okay.
you can't put a boat in a utility, like you could never put a pontoon boat in a trailer.
So we have a definition that we're adding for
So I just
utility.
want some clarity.
For
on this.
utility trailer that we're adding to the code too. So the definition currently, and, you know, for whatever it's worth, is enclosed or unenclosed vehicle which is not motorized or self-propelled, which is designed to be towed by motor vehicle, but not designed for human occupancy, and which may include, but is not limited to, a boat trailer, car trailer, or horse trailer. So if you have a boat trailer and a boat sitting on that trailer, then this would count towards your utility trailer, or the boat trailer would count.
So basically, if you have a boat and
You
trailer,
can't have a trailer
so you-
without you can't have a boat without a trailer.
yeah.
Okay, so are you proposing to increase the number? What's the
Yeah, I mean,
proposal?
I'd be willing to, I don't agree with 2 enclosed trailers, but I'd hate to tell people, if you have a boat with a trailer, because you live across the street from Lake Conway, but your business is a painter in an enclosed trailer where you carry all your supplies, I would like to separate those as not being able to count as one. Because, I mean, we would have a problem in my community.
Yeah, the boat trailers can't count as the trailer
Yeah.
count.
Or as long as you're also allowed to get a boat trailer in addition to a utility trailer?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy with an enclosed trailer or a trailer and a boat with boat trailer.
Okay.
Or just say that, you know how you, if you don't mind, can I?
Yeah.
All right.
Go for it.
So you know how you read that and you said, for the exception of a trailer that a human or whatever can live in, you could add, or that a boat, or is that used for a boat, something like that, maybe.
Okay, we can look into
I would
that.
just like to decipher the boat and the trailer, because the boat can't
So
fit.
boat trailers won't be included in these counts.
Right. And those are usually very thin and long and small, so
It's
they're
under the boat.
With, yeah.
You can't
With,
vote.
well, the problem I have is that I have people who live on the lake who have it, but then I have people who live across the street and drop it in the dock. They can't leave their boat in the lake.
Look, we're in Florida. We have
Yeah.
lakes everywhere. Almost, a lot of people have boats, but they don't live on lakes.
On the biosolid septic treatment and storage facilities, you have here 7 AM to 7 PM. Is there any kind of decipher on the days of the week? Because while we say 7 AM to 7 PM,
Are you looking at the presentation or the specific code?
I'm looking, I have my codes here, but I haven't gone through them. I don't want,
Sorry, I'm just trying to find the code section.
I know, so if you, it's slide 9.
Okay.
Yeah. Because while there's hours of operations, there isn't days. And that's, unfortunately for me, I have a lot of these treatment facilities on Central Florida Parkway.
Thank you. So it's page 53 of the ordinance, in case anyone wants to follow along on the actual ordinance. Okay, so your question is,
You've got the hours of operations, you don't have any days, are we not? So we're saying 7 days a week? And if we are, then can you put that clarity in there?
the answer is yes, we're saying 7 days a week.
Okay, can we just make sure it's added because
Sure.
it's been interpreted differently? I did, can you please on slide number 18, which is the parking, based on the parcel size of the maximum parking spaces to be granted, a reduction as basis of this waiver shall not exceed the following: smaller than 10,000 square feet, 10% or 3 spaces, whichever is less.
So that provision is not just a general guarantee. That is specifically if someone is trying to preserve a specimen or heritage tree. It's not just a given. It's if they're trying, if they've got a site and they're trying to work around the site, and if it means removing a parking space or two to save a specimen or heritage tree, then we added this provision.
So this will be very specific to the
Yes.
trees, not the code for,
No.
okay.
This is
That's
very
why I wanted-
specific. The start of this sections, which is page 137, says the preservation of specimen trees, and then we reference the tree code.
Okay.
You know,
Okay, that's why I asked.
may be considered as the reduction or the basis for granting a waiver by me. So then I also take a look at it, see if there's any other ways that we can get what we need to get out of it. It's not just a given. And then it's also very limited and very specific to certain parcels and certain types of parcels. We worked with the Transportation Planning Division on that to make sure that they were also comfortable with whatever potential parking minimums might, reductions through an administrative process would be. It
Okay.
wasn't just a blanket for any site or any
Okay,
property.
that's why I asked, okay. On the accessory structures, when, I am concerned about that 5 feet to 2 feet when we talk about those sheds. I brought that up in my meeting. I don't see, when you think of how things are laid out and the structure now that we're doing, when we looked at planned PSPs, is it's smaller lot sizes, it's smaller everything. And when you start now saying that setback compared to what it was, I don't see why we would stop from 5 feet. 5 feet seems very reasonable to me, and to go to 0 or 2 seems unreasonable. It doesn't, there's just no rhyme or reason at this point when you're talking about, going up, because you're not always guaranteeing a fence and so forth. You're basically saying right on your property, and like you guys brought up, you can't even run a lawnmower behind it. I mean, and that's concerning, and also what could be in these storage things is another, a little bit of concerning, not saying that everything is just gas or propane or whatever, what that could mean.
And as we discussed yesterday, that was a specific portion, that was in the motion that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended. This was not something that we were proposing to amend in terms of that section. They wanted to make that amendment to that section. So that's why it's included in here.
Okay.
If that's something that the board is not comfortable with, then we would like to get clear direction from you on that so that we can remove that.
Can I weigh in on this?
Sure. Remove it.
All right, Commissioner Bonilla.
Yeah, so I also had the same concern because, and I learned this from watching the news on the Hawaii wildfires. There's one house, they call it the house with the red roof, that has survived the wildfires, and they were looking into how that happened. And one of the things that, no, it was red. Yeah, it was, one of the things that saved the house was that they had a buffer around the house, 5 foot buffer, of nothing, and so I looked that up too to see, so how do I make my house wildfire proof? Hardening the home to wildfire with ignition resistant siding, roofing, decks, attic vents, windows and everything. Avoid storing combustible materials on or under desks. Remove vegetation and flammable mulch to create a 5-foot buffer zone around the home. So that was, from a website saying how to, harden your home against wildfires. When the article about that red roof home, it says experts suggest that homeowners clear flammable vegetation in a 5-foot radius and replace it with hardscape feature such as paving, stones, or gravel, similar to what the Millikins did. So the Millikins are the family who had that house. So that's why when I heard this, it concerned me a lot, because then you're putting this within that you're not having that 5-foot buffer, and then what's going to be on the other side too, which may also be closer, and then
100%.
one gets on fire, the other one gets on fire, and,
100% agree. I think that there's a consensus of us that we want to maintain that 5. And then lastly was the 100-foot from one multifamily, single family. We had discussed it yesterday. As we're creating a lot of infill, we still have to, in my opinion, try to protect or give some sort of ability to negotiate our established communities. This is especially hard for me because we've had that situation happen. I have on Nila Road where there's residential, 1-story next to what's going to be an apartment complex because of what's coming through the changes. And one of the things that Jennifer brought up, which was great, was we'll live local, right? But one thing about live local, if live local says you have to follow the rules of that county. And so if we put in that protection, they can request a variance. And I don't want to say it's a blanket for everything, but I think that if somebody wants to come less than that, it's better to negotiate that than to just give it away when it comes to creating our rules, our set rules that are established in the county. And I would love to propose that because they can come and ask for a variance to make that less, but to not have any ability to negotiate, protect. That was how in the 11th hour, and Commissioner Wilson, you probably remember, I was able to get that conservation area, right? This is our ability to negotiate. I mean, I'm open to case by case of looking at a variance, but I would hate to give away any ability to have any kind of negotiating when it comes to that. And like I said, as we continue to become an infill county, we have to give a little bit of protection to our communities that are existing. And I hope we would consider that as using, what was the thing we talked about? Using it as a condition as opposed to
So staff is, it's shown here on the screen, but not in the way that you see it in your ordinance. So on page 2 of Appendix A, which is at the back of the ordinance packet, I guess that is not actually, basically the second page after page 182, on the second part of the use table, there's a provision in the use table that says that multifamily residential buildings in excess of 1 story in height within 100 feet of the property line of any single-family dwelling district and use, exclusive of 2-story single-family and 2-story two-family dwellings, requires a special exception in the multifamily zoning district, which is basically R2 and R3.
so, no, but they're trying to remove it. So
And
instead
so-
if it's a condition. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So staff was recommending that we strike this for a couple of reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is, under the live local provision, you can do multifamily in commercial or industrial districts, and you just have to meet the multifamily standards. But it specifically says you can't, I'm trying to remember now, but something to the effect of but you also can't, you don't have to go through any process. You don't have to go through a special exception process, any other type of process in order to do that. And so we're essentially, with live local, it's easier to build multifamily and commercial and industrial developments or properties than it is now to build multifamily on properties that we've zoned specifically for multifamily. Because those properties actually need to get a special exception if they're within 100 feet of an adjacent single-family property. Now, mind you, the multifamily zoning district only allows for a 35-foot height. Single-family homes also are allowed to be 35 feet in height. So from our standpoint, it just doesn't make sense that provision stay in here, but
I was stating in my community, it's all single-family older homes, and essentially, and I say, if we do it as a condition, they can still request it to be changed, but we're not giving it away. That's what I'm basically saying. Let's not give it away up front. They can come and request it, and we can grant them. We do them anyways. But to give it away, we can set it as a condition, because even under Live Local, if we had Live Local says they follow the conditions that are set by the county. So if it's a condition, it would give us a protection. They can still apply for a variance if they want to do 75 feet or whatever pertains to it. But it doesn't hurt us to have that. But to not have anything hurts us more than to not have at least that ability to do it. And that's where I had talked to them yesterday about this, because, like I said, they can still apply for a variance, but at least if we set it as a condition, it's a threshold to try to do better as we're infilling. And that's the other thing, because we're saying Live Local, but it doesn't mean everything that will come would be Live Local. It could just be an apartment complex. They could be market rate. It's not necessarily saying only Live Local applications. And so that's what I've asked, and I would love to have you guys support, because they can still apply for an exception or variance. We're not giving it all away, and if we really are trying to stick to the Live Local because we want more housing, this doesn't guarantee that would be a Live Local apartment complex. So that's what I've asked, is a level of protection for us to have and negotiate.
And so to clarify, staff is requesting that we remove this in its entirety. As part of our discussions with the commissioner yesterday, she was not comfortable with that. One of the ideas that we discussed is possibly, instead of making it a special exception, take it out of a separate category and then basically add a condition under just the regular multifamily section of code that says something to the effect of, if you're doing multifamily adjacent to single family, within 100, or it can't be closer than 100 feet. Now, technically, that would be more restrictive than what the code already has in place now. So that was something that the commissioner, was supportive of, but staff is asking that we strike this, so.
And let me just close saying, I'm not saying, it's just a case by case, and it allows us the ability to actually have the ability to negotiate as opposed to never coming in front of us at all.
Can I weigh in?
Yes, yeah, well, please, weigh in.
All right. I agree. And the reason, because from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, with Live Local, they still, if there's, they still have to follow our conditions, our setbacks and everything like that.
That's correct.
If what they're building doesn't fall into that, then they can't use Live Local. Then they have to follow the regular process.
If they don't meet the typical development standards, correct. So
Yes.
for multifamily projects, and it's R2 and R3 are slightly different, but for all intents and purposes, they're the same. You're already required, if you're next to single-family zoning, you're already required to have a 30-foot side setback. You're already required to have a 30-foot rear setback. You're already required to have additional buffer yards and other things to buffer the multifamily from the single-family. So there's already additional, standards and things that are applied either through Live Local or just your typical multifamily standards. We were trying to simplify the process and make it a little easier to build the type of housing, the missing middle and those types of things that we continue to say that we want or like. The other option, if it's, completely palatable, is to just not strike it through and leave it exactly as it is. So you're not making it more restrictive, you're just keeping it exactly as it is.
Yeah, so my point is we want as many, I guess, things in place that kind of puts them in that category where then we have to review it and it comes to
Yes.
us rather than
It
it
just
going
goes by.
straight to whatever
100%.
under Live Local.
Absolutely.
So, we have to be very careful not to give away things because of that.
You're with me, we're in the car.
Because we have to stay.
We're riding together.
Yeah. With our kids in the back. No, just kidding.
Okay, let's try to stay on track. Let's, we, at this rate, we'll be here really late, so let's try to get to your points.
And can I
Okay.
request a follow-up meeting? Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Moore.
This is for Brandy. This is a very, very simple one. We had discussed, you didn't mention it today, in industrial zoning. Did we do anything in terms of the garbage and the barriers, the dividers? You didn't say anything about that today, but I thought we had cleaned that up.
The rec road. Yes, so we had added language, it's on page 75, that refuge and solid waste areas shall comply with the following. It can't be located within any front yard. It shall not be located within any landscape buffer. It shall not be located at least 5 feet from any side or rear property line. It shall be located at least 15 feet from any side street. And disposal areas shall be screened in accordance with Chapter 9 or Chapter 24, which is our landscaping ordinance. And then Article 10 of the chapter would have additional environmental performance standards. We added that to all of the commercial and industrial districts as well as the multifamily districts because those are the types of districts that typically have a dumpster associated with them.
We've definitely had a lot of problems with that. All right. Well, you didn't mention it in the presentation today, but I was just making sure it was there. Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Scott? Correction, Commissioner Bonilla.
Okay, so a lot of the things that I was going to bring up was covered. I just have something that wasn't covered was the solar the solar panels for, or the accessory structures not being included.
Accessory dwelling structures?
So essentially,
Which page was that?
we have separate solar panel standards. Then we have accessory structure standards, which a ground-mounted solar panel technically could be considered an accessory structure. But under our code, we basically say those accessory structures don't apply. You're not counting those. They have different sets of standards in the solar code.
What are they then?
What are we on? Page 43. So if you look at page 42 and 43, it's condition number 83 of our code. And it includes wind turbines and freestanding solar panels. Requirement that it's screened from the right-of-way from view and any adjacent properties by fencing or vegetation. Minimum setback shall be 5 feet from side and rear property lines and 15 feet from the side street property line. We already talked about removing the cap on it. We're just going to defer to the electrical code. And then we're adding in the provision or clarifying that the square footage of that system doesn't count towards the allowed square footage for other accessory structures, because our accessory structures section of the code has a cumulative total square footage. So we're essentially saying that's not going to count against you.
Okay, so it is, so an example would be more helpful. So if, let's say you had a house and 1 or 2 accessory units, the square footage of the house and those accessory units are included in what the solar panels can power.
No, we're taking out any reference to the amount or type of solar panel. What we're referencing is just cumulative square footage for accessory structures only, not the house, in terms of our accessory structure standards. So we say you can't, basically, the standards essentially say your entire backyard can't be filled with accessory structures. There's a cap depending on the size of your lot.
I understand that, but I understand that. What I'm saying is, so let's say there's a property, they want to be off the grid, they're not connected to Duke Energy or whatever, they're self-powered through the solar panel that's on the ground, and they have a house, and let's say an accessory unit or whatever, however many.
So they would be subject to whatever the electrical code would otherwise allow.
Okay, so it should be able to power all those buildings.
I can't speak to what it is. I can just, that's the electrical building code. There's already provisions in that code. So we were originally proposing to add in the language that you see on the screen, the 120%. We're now proposing to just take that out because, in speaking with the building official, he basically said it's already covered on the electrical code, and then if the electrical code gets updated, then you don't want to have to update the zoning code. It's already covered, so why belt and suspender it?
Okay, so I was just confused with the slide. I thought it meant like that, those wouldn't be included for the solar. Okay, so my other question, which I should have asked you in our meeting, but, so where's the part about the front of the house? So the on-ground cannot be in front of the house?
Are you talking about solar panels or
The
something?
solar panels on the ground, they can't go in front of the house? So they only see setbacks for the side and the rear, and side street property line.
Let's see here. I'm not finding the front yard setback. I think it's because we typically just don't allow them in the front yard, but you may be correct that it's not actually in here explicitly.
Okay, and and the reason why
Am
I'm
I
asking,
missing
because a
that,
lot
Taylor?
of the, like my house, the front of the house faces south. If I put put it behind my house, it's gonna be covered by the shadow of the house. So I would prefer to put it in front of my house and cover it with a fence so you can't see it from the street,
I mean, we typically don't allow accessory structures of any kind in the front yard or the side street yard, so,
But if I put it in the back, I mean, I have trees and everything, it's gonna cover it. It's not gonna work.
is the board directing us to
Exactly. So, she says
modify?
my house is far from the road. Exactly. So I have all this room in front of my house to be able to put the solar panels. So you apply for a variance?
Jennifer?
You could, yes, if you didn't meet the provisions of code, then you could apply for a variance if there was a good reason for it. That's the whole point of the variance process.
Okay.
It is in there that solar panels are only allowed in the rear and side yards.
Thank you, Joel.
That's at
Which-
page 43, line 1658.
Thank you.
Unless you have a variance allowed.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, and another thing is too, you don't want the solar panels too far away from your house because then you lose electricity as it travels, which is just saying that just so that you understand
Thank you.
the situation. All right, and I think that was all that I had because everything else was covered by the other commissioners.
All right. Okay. Commissioner Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So other than what we've shared in the briefing, what I would like for you to prepare for when we speak again prior to our adoption hearing is kind of like what Commissioner Uribe was speaking about. Like, I think about the issue as it relates to the church on Claricona, Coe, and Powers, going back to the trailers, something that's defensible because if let's say I get cited by code enforcement because I have a trailer, I'll be like, hey, you cited me because I have this type of trailer when I actually have that. And so when you talk about like a trailer, you can have a trailer that does have a boat that you can put on, or you can have a trailer with storage. And so given that there are different types of trailers that people can have, crafting it in a way that is easily defensible for us, knowing that someone tries to key in on the nuances when they're trying to fight a code enforcement complaint. Because again, they're going to cite them based on the code. And if you cited me, I was like, well, yeah, your code says this, I had that. And so just really kind of diving a little bit deeper into how we define trailer and how it's actually articulated in the code so that when those instances, if those instances should occur, it just results in less of a headache for us and for the code enforcement staff.
Okay.
No further questions, Mayor. Thank you.
All right, Mayor, sorry. just
All
have a
right.
question.
Commissioner Bonilla.
So, the one with the triangle in front of the driveway that to have
The
visibility.
Clearview triangle?
The what?
The Clearview triangle? We're talking about fences?
Yes,
Okay.
fences. I have a constituent who got a code enforcement violation for not having that. There's going to be a whole bunch of old homes already built with fences. Are they all going to get code enforcement violations?
Well, that's already a requirement, and we already have
Yeah, I
multiple
understand.
variances that come before the board and as a specific result of that. What we're proposing to do will actually loosen that requirement and give them an option to at least put a fence in that area. It would just be capped at 4 feet. Right now, you can't have a fence at all in that area.
Yeah, but if they already have, and this is fences you can't see through, because so most likely it's going to be like a cement fence or, cement block fence or something like
So
that.
that's not currently allowed in code, and it would not be allowed under our proposed revisions.
So what are we going to do with all those homes that already have that? Because it was
Well,
pre.
if they obtained a fence permit legally at the time, maybe
Yeah.
prior to whenever the original code provision was put in place, then it's allowed to remain indefinitely. If
So
they
they
put in a
won't get a-
fence without a permit, which frankly most people do, then they have to meet the current requirements of code at the time that they come in for the permit.
Okay.
Once again, what we're proposing will actually loosen the requirements to allow them to put some type of fencing in that area. It may not be the fence that they built without a permit, but at least to have some kind of fencing in that area as opposed to no fencing at all.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Scott, were you done?
Yes, Mayor. Thank you. I'm sorry. There we go. We're good.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Wilson. You're done.
Thank you.
All right. Then,
If everyone's done, did you have any comments, Mayor? Sorry.
No.
Okay.
We're-
I just wanted to get
we're
clear
nearly done.
direction
Okay.
on, I think we understand we need to look at the utility trailer stuff, we need to look at the Planning and Zoning Commission language there. What else, but I would like to get clear direction on the multifamily. Are we keeping it in? Are we striking it? Are we doing some alternative?
All right, general
Okay.
consensus is
not
that
broken, don't fix
leave it in. We may need to
And I
tweak
think-
it, though.
And I think especially knowing that we
Okay.
don't know what's
But-
going to happen with Live Local.
Yeah,
Okay, so remove the strike-through essentially.
yeah, yes.
Okay,
Okay,
okay.
let's do that. You had a slide up in terms of next steps. You were not requesting specific action today, but I want to try to just go back to that slide. Where do we head from here and make sure that we're clear? Is the goal to still do the public hearing on the 12th?
Yes, that's still our goal. I believe that most of these changes are fairly minor and
Okay,
easy
so-
to address.
That is going to require, you to meet with the commissioners to make sure that,
We will offer another briefing, absolutely.
okay. And because this is going to move quickly, we got a lot on the board agendas for the remainder of the year. So I just point that out to you. If there is nothing else, do you all have anything else, Brandy?
Isn't that enough, Mayor?
It's plenty.
It's 187 pages plus an appendix, so.
All right. If there's nothing else before us today, we stand adjourned.